In 1923, a German banker named Friedrich Hecker watched his life savings buy less than a cup of coffee, where he'd spent 30 years building a respectable fortune, including government bonds and a pension, and a savings account at a reputable Berlin bank, all denominated in marks and all worthless by November. Meanwhile, a wheat farmer 40 miles outside the city, representing a man with no education and no financial sophistication and no connections, was richer than he'd ever been, where his grain was worth more every single day and people were trading pianos and fur coats and family silver for bags of flour. Same crisis and same country and same year, but completely opposite outcomes. And the thing that separated them wasn't luck or timing or intelligence, but what they held. This is a story about the things that survive when money dies. And if you think it's ancient history that couldn't happen today, consider this. Every single fiat currency ever created has either collapsed or lost the vast majority of its value. The dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since 1913, where we're not outside this pattern, but we're inside it. And this pattern of specific types of assets surviving while everything else burns isn't unique to Germany, but shows up in every major currency crisis and every hyperinflation and every financial collapse across 4,000 years of recorded history. The assets change their names, but they never change their nature. Before we continue, though, understanding which 6 asset categories have survived every currency crisis from ancient Rome to modern Venezuela, while bonds and pensions and savings accounts evaporated, diverges sharply from mainstream financial advice narratives. Real wealth preservation requires studying these historical survival patterns, so subscribe to the channel so you never get caught off guard by financial crises. Asset 1. Productive land that grows foods, holds minerals, or sits on water. The first asset that survives every crisis is the most ancient one. Land, including not land as a line item on a portfolio spreadsheet, but productive land, the kind that grows food or holds minerals or sits on water. When currencies collapse, the economy doesn't stop where people still eat, and they still need shelter and fuel and raw materials, and whoever controls the source of those things holds real power regardless of what's happening to the money. In Weimar Germany, farmers who owned their land outright became the new aristocracy almost overnight, where they could demand payment in gold or in foreign currency or in goods, and a pig farmer could trade a single hog for a grand piano that once cost a banker 3 months' salary. That's not an exaggeration, but from the historical record. In Zimbabwe's collapse in 2008, the same pattern played out where farmers with productive land and livestock had something people would trade anything for, while urban workers with savings accounts denominated in Zimbabwe dollars had nothing. The reason is simple. Land produces things that have value, independent of any currency, where a bushel of wheat feeds a family whether the dollar is worth 100 cents or half a cent. And that independence from the monetary system is what makes land the oldest crisis-proof asset in human history. Asset 2. Gold serves as default money when official currency breaks. The second asset is gold, and before you roll your eyes, this isn't about gold bugs or conspiracy theories, but about math and human behavior. When a currency fails, an entire society needs something to use as money, including not eventually, but immediately. And for thousands of years, the thing humans default to is gold. Not because it's magical, but because it's recognizable and divisible and portable, and critically, no government can print more of it. During the French Revolution, the government issued paper currency called assignats, where they were backed by seized church lands, and for a while people trusted them, but then the government printed more and more, where within 5 years, assignats had lost over 99% of their value. People who had converted their paper into gold early preserved everything, while people who waited lost everything. And the same dynamic played out in Argentina in the 1980s and in Russia in the 1990s and in Venezuela in the 2010s. Gold didn't perform well because of some mystical property, but performed because when official money breaks, humans revert to the oldest monetary technology available, and whoever holds it becomes the person everyone else needs to deal with. There's a pattern here worth paying attention to. Gold doesn't make you rich in stable times, but makes you solvent when everyone else is broke, representing a very different function. And it's the reason that central banks, the very institutions that issue paper currency, hold more gold today than at any point in the last 30 years, where they know something and maybe we should pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Asset 3. Businesses with pricing power can adjust faster than currency falls. The third asset is harder to see, but it might be the most powerful one. Businesses with pricing power, including not every business, because most don't survive, but there's a specific type that not only survives but gets stronger. These are companies that sell things people cannot stop buying and that can raise prices as fast as the currency falls. Think about it. If you make luxury handbags and a currency crisis hits, your customers vanish. But if you produce cooking oil or electricity or a medicine or fuel demand, it doesn't drop because it can't. And if you're the one producing it, you can adjust your prices daily or weekly or even hourly to keep up with inflation. During Brazil's chronic inflation in the 1980s, which ran at thousands of percent per year, supermarket chains repriced their shelves multiple times a day, where companies that produced essential goods maintained their real margins, while companies that couldn't reprice fast enough got destroyed. The principle is the same everywhere, including in Argentina and in Turkey and any inflationary environment, where the businesses that survive are the ones that can pass costs to consumers instantly, because those consumers have no alternative. That's not greed, but the structural reality of who gets to keep their purchasing power and who doesn't. The pattern. 6 categories absorb wealth from collapsing currencies across 4,000 years. 6 assets and 6 categories that show up in every crisis across 4,000 years. And here's what the historical record actually shows. In every major currency crisis, from ancient Rome, debasing its silver coins, to revolutionary France, to Weimar Germany, to modern Venezuela, the same 6 categories of assets absorb the wealth that flows out of the collapsing currency. Productive land and gold, and businesses with pricing power and foreign currency holdings and real estate and essential skills. And in every single case, the people who got destroyed were the ones holding the most responsible assets, including savings accounts and government bonds and pensions and fixed income instruments, representing the assets that financial advisors call safe. The assets that are safe right up until they aren't. The uncomfortable truth is that monetary stability is not the default state of civilization, but the exception where most currencies in human history have eventually failed or been dramatically devalued. The dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was created, where that's not a collapse, but a slow erosion. And yet the direction is the same one that precedes every crisis in the historical record. None of this is a prediction, where nobody knows the timing of the next crisis, or whether it will be sudden or gradual. But the pattern of what survives and what doesn't, representing that pattern, is 4,000 years old, and it has never been wrong. The question isn't whether you believe a crisis is coming, but whether the things you hold right now are the things that have historically made it through to the other side. Because when the next one hits, and the historical record says there will be a next one, it won't matter what you knew, but will only matter what you held. What separated Friedrich Hecker from the wheat farmer was in asset selection, not intelligence. Let me bring this back to where we began with Friedrich Hecker, the German banker and the wheat farmer 40 miles outside Berlin in 1923. Hecker did everything right according to conventional financial wisdom, where he saved diligently and bought government bonds and maintained a pension and kept his money in a reputable bank, and all of it denominated in marks became worthless. The farmer did nothing sophisticated, where he simply owned productive land that grew wheat, and when the currency collapsed, his land produced food that people desperately needed regardless of what happened to the mark. Hecker's knowledge and his education and his connections couldn't save him because he held assets denominated in a dying currency, while the farmer's lack of sophistication didn't matter because he held a physical asset that produced value independent of any monetary system. That's the lesson where it's not about being smart or being informed or following conventional wisdom, but about understanding which assets survive when the monetary system breaks. The historical record shows exactly which 6 categories survive, and the question is whether you're positioned in them or making the same mistake Friedrich Hecker made. Thanks for watching. Here's what I want, knowing from you though. If productive land and gold and businesses with pricing power and foreign currency and real estate and essential skills consistently preserve wealth across every crisis from Rome to Venezuela, while bonds and pensions consistently evaporate, does this prove conventional financial advice represents unacknowledged exposure to monetary system failure? Or does it ignore that crises are rare enough that optimizing for them means missing decades of stable returns? That distinction determines whether to restructure portfolios toward crisis-resistant assets permanently, or accept that traditional diversification remains optimal most of the time. So drop your take in the comments, because I genuinely want hearing whether the 4,000-year pattern justifies permanent defensive positioning or represents survivorship bias, causing more harm through foregone gains than protection. The question isn't whether you believe a crisis is coming, but whether the things you hold right now have historically made it through to the other side. Asset 4. Foreign currency holdings protect wealth from local collapse. The fourth asset is foreign currency, specifically holding claims denominated in someone else's stable money when your own is collapsing. And this is the one that separates the wealthy from the middle class in almost every currency crisis in modern history. The wealthy move their money offshore into dollar-denominated assets before the collapse accelerates, while the middle class, who hold everything in local currency and local bank accounts and local bonds and local pensions, watch it evaporate. In Latin America during the 1980s debt crisis, the pattern was textbook, where wealthy families had dollar accounts in Miami and real estate in New York and holdings in Swiss francs, and when local currencies collapsed across Mexico and Brazil and Argentina, their wealth was untouched. Meanwhile, a school teacher in Buenos Aires who had diligently saved for 30 years in peso-denominated accounts lost essentially everything. The mechanism is brutally straightforward. If your wealth is denominated in the currency that's failing, your wealth fails with it. But if it's denominated in something else, you watch the crisis from the outside. This is why in every country that has experienced monetary instability, the demand for US dollars or Swiss francs or any perceived stable currency explodes, where people aren't making an investment thesis but running for the exit, and the ones who get there first keep the most. It's also why capital controls, meaning governments restricting how much money you can move abroad, are almost always one of the first signs that a crisis is accelerating, or when the government starts locking the exits, it's because people are already trying to leave. Asset 5. Real estate provides physical shelter whose replacement cost rises with inflation. The fifth asset is real estate, but not the way most people think about it, where in a currency crisis, real estate doesn't protect you because prices go up on a screen, but protects you because a building is a physical thing that people need, and its replacement cost rises with everything else. You can't print an apartment building where you can't inflate away the concrete and the steel and the labor it took to build it. In Weimar, Germany, apartment owners in Berlin saw the nominal value of their buildings skyrocket into the billions of marks representing meaningless numbers, but here's what mattered. When the crisis ended and a new currency was established, those buildings were still there and still collecting rent and still worth real purchasing power. The people who had held marks in a bank account came out with nothing, while the people who had held buildings came out whole. The same thing happened in post-Soviet Russia in the early 1990s, whereas the ruble disintegrated, apartment owners in Moscow discovered that their real estate, which they'd often received for free during privatization, was suddenly their most valuable possession. Everything denominated in rubles was gone, but the walls and the roof remained where real estate works in a crisis, for the same reason land works, because it exists outside the currency system. It's a physical object with utility that doesn't depend on what any government decides about money, where you can change the currency, but you can't change the fact that people need a place to live. Asset 6. Essential skills. Create negotiating power in barter economies. There's a sixth asset, and it's the one almost nobody discusses. Skills where in every major currency crisis there's a class of people who come through relatively unscathed, not because of what they own, but because of what they can do. Doctors and electricians and mechanics and engineers, including anyone whose skill is essential and whose payment can be negotiated in real time. In Hungary's 1946 hyperinflation, the most extreme ever recorded, where prices doubled every 15 hours, factory workers demanded daily wage adjustments, while government employees on fixed salaries were wiped out. But a skilled plumber who could set his own price for each job ate where this isn't a soft motivational point about investing in yourself, but a hard economic reality. When currency breaks down, the economy reverts to something closer to barter. And in a barter economy, the person who can fix your pipes or treat your illness or repair your car has more negotiating power than someone holding a government bond worth less than the paper it's printed on. Skills are the only crisis-proof asset that requires zero capital to acquire and can't be confiscated or inflated away or taxed into nothing. And yet they're the one almost everyone overlooks when thinking about financial protection.